Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week we continue the embarrassment that is our series of episodes about W.B. Yeats. To summarise from last episode, W.B. Yeats was part of a literary movement which led to the style of fairies that we mostly saw in Ars Magica 2nd edition. The problem with that for us was that it tended to push the Irish were right view out across all of mythic Europe, so that you were seeing Irish-style fairies everywhere, rather than extracts from the local folklore. The other problem with Yeats is that he cheats a lot, and many of his Irish fairies aren't Irish at all. For example, the one that we had last week, as I said, comes from a Greek folk song. He was also terribly anti-Semitic, but that material doesn't show up here. Rather than continue to torture myself by inviting the old enemy into my home time and time again, I'm going to string all of these episodes together into one slightly longer episode. You will notice his most famous fairy poem, which is The Stolen Child, isn't among these stories, because these all come from The Wind in the Reeds, which is one of his earlier works. Still, if you enjoy these poems, The Stolen Child, particularly the Lorena McKennett version, is well worth listening to. Thanks again to all the LibriVox recorders. I'm just going to steal their names from the recordings rather than reading them now. I'll pop in at the end of each poem with some plot hooks.
The Hosting of the Seether. Read for LibriVox.org by Justin Bread. The host is riding from Knocknarea and over the grave of Clwtnaber, Quelter tossing his burning hair, and Neve calling, "Away, come away! Empty your heart of its mortal dream. The winds awaken, the leaves whirl round, our cheeks are pale, our hair is unbound, our breasts are heaving, our eyes are agleam, our arms are waving, our lips are apart, and if any gaze on our rushing band, we come between him and the deed of his hand, we come between him and the hope of his heart." The host is rushing twixt night and day, and where is there hope or deed as fair? Quelter tossing his burning hair, and Neve calling, "Away, come away."
The initial obvious plot hooks are the two characters who are described. But beyond that, it's useful in that it gives us material about how the fairy host looks. Generally, the fairy host that we've used in Ars Magica has been either a sort of wild thing like Hern's Hunt, or a chivalric thing, knights in silver armour prancing about the place. Yeats's point here is that she, S-I-D-H, which refers to fairies, can also refer, according to him, to the wind, and so they always have streaming locks, they always have dishevelled clothes. When people see whirlwinds in the street, they believe that that's a she passing by and they don't look at them. There is, strangely, a similar custom among some Australian Aborigines, but they believe that the creature that is inside the whirlwind is a sort of human cassowary crossbreed. Sorry, I'm meandering. So, this gives us a different way of portraying the she as an elemental force, hence the term that turns up in urban fiction all the time, the Queen of Air and Darkness.
The Cap and Bells. Read for LibriVox.org by Diana Meilinger. The jester walked in the garden. The garden had fallen still. He bade his soul rise upward and stand on her window sill. It rose in a straight blue garment when owls began to call. It had grown wise-tongued by thinking of a quiet and light footfall. But the young queen would not listen. She rose in her pale night-gown. She drew in the heavy casement and pushed the latches down. He bade his heart go to her when the owls called out no more. In a red and quivering garment it sang to her through the door. It had grown sweet-tongued by dreaming of a flutter of flower-like hair. But she took up her fan from the table and waved it off on the air. "I have cap and bells," he pondered. I will send them to her, and die. And when the morning whitened, he left them where she went by. She laid them upon her bosom, under a cloud of her hair, and her red lips sang them a love song, till stars grew out of the air. She opened her door and her window, and the heart and the soul came through. To her right hand came the red one, to her left hand came the blue. They set up a noise like crickets, a chattering wise and sweet, and her hair was a folded flower, and the quiet of love in her feet.
I'd like to flag this as an example both of ecstasis, that is, the ability to spiritually wander, and a source for the ghostly water virtue. That is, the jester after he dies becomes the ghostly water of the queen, possibly because he has true love which allows him to transcend death.
A pleads with the elemental powers. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Sean Daly. The powers whose name and shape no living creature knows have pulled the immortal rose, and though the seven lights bowed in their dance and wept, the polar dragon slept, his heavy rings uncoiled from glimmering deep to deep. When will he wake from sleep? Great powers of falling wave and wind and windy fire, with your harmonious choir, encircle her I love and sing her into peace, that my old care may cease. Unfold your flaming wings and cover out of sight the nets of day and night. Dim powers of drowsy thought, let her no longer be like the pale cup of the sea, when winds have gathered and sun and moon burn dim above its cloudy rim. But let a gentle silence wrought with music flow whither her footsteps go.
This one's a touch more Maginomia than Ars Magica. The elemental powers, strictly speaking, are a type of demon. We might stretch it because he mentions a couple of constellations to say that instead these are magical spirits, and that this enchanter is asking the magical spirits to protect his beloved, to give her magic resistance and other powers such that her life is more comfortable. That polar dragon, though, really does need statistics.
Aed wishes his beloved were dead. Read for LibriVox.org by Savannah Allday. Were you but lying cold and dead, and lights were paling out of the west, you would come hither and bend your head, and I would lay my head on your breast, and you would murmur tender words, forgiving me because you were dead, nor would you rise and hasten away, though you have the will of the wild birds. But know your hair was bound and wound about the stars and moon and sun. O would, beloved, that you lay under the dock leaves in the ground, while lights were paling one by one.
Necromancers, in the order of Hermes, tend, speaking very generally, to be strange people with poor social skills. And so I can imagine one of them preferring that a person that he was in love with should be dead, and asking the player characters to arrange that because he doesn't see death as a big deal. It just makes his beloved a little bit more malleable, a little more willing to pay him attention, a tiny bit more convenient to communicate with.
Mongan thinks of his past greatness. Read for LibriVox.org by Savannah Allday. I have drunk ale from the country of the young, and weep because I know all things now. I have been a hazel tree, and they hung, the pilot star and the crooked plough. Among my leaves, and times out of mind, I became a rush that horses tread. I became a man, a hater of the wind, knowing one out of all things alone, that his head would not lie on the breast or his lips on the hair of the woman that he loves until he dies, although the rushes and the fowl of the air cry of his love with their pitiful cries.
One of the mystagogic initiations in certain fairy traditions are illusory lives spent either in fairy or in a sacred place, where the character lives as a different creature. In Lake Canyon, for example, there are people who are transformed into wolves. There are others who are transformed into trees. Some people suggest that the druids go through cyclical reincarnations, so House Diadne could be showing up any time now. See Sub Rosa, issue, I want to say 13, for lots of articles about that idea. And so we come to the end of the torture that is the presence of W.B. Yeats. Stats for all these things eventually on the blog that accompanies the podcast. Your saga may vary.